I'm Dale Smith for Looney Politics, and this last week the federal government unveiled a new piece of legislation around the criminal justice system. This is a long time coming. The Liberals have been promising this for a long time, and it took 6 years and 2 justice ministers for it to happen. What it largely does is a large swath of removing mandatory minimum sentences around certain kinds of drug offenses as well as certain firearms offenses, most of which have already been struck down by the Supreme Court, but this takes them off the books for good. The drug offense aspects are not full decriminalization, but it does take a step in that direction. And this is something that has largely been called for by public health officials and including the councils of cities like Vancouver and Montreal, where there's a big impact of the opioid crisis on those cities. Now, this isn't the full swath of what they're asking for, but it's a step in that direction. Now, the government's rationale is not that this is about combating the opioid crisis, but rather this is about looking at the over-incarceration of Black and Indigenous peoples in Canada. So a lot of these offenses are ones that have a disproportionate impact on those populations, as well as they've done analysis to ensure that, these are some of the sentences or the offenses for which they are mostly criminalized for. And it seeks to tackle these by not only removing the mandatory minimum sentences, but also restoring the possibility of conditional sentences for a lot of these offenses, which means that they can do community service or house arrest or other kinds of punishments which are aimed at keeping people in the community, not breaking up families, and so on, because that is one of the biggest problems with the over-incarceration of these minority populations. Now, this bill is going to be interesting in how it plays out in the House of Commons, because the Conservatives have decided that they're not going to oppose the removal of mandatory minimums on those drug offenses, particularly around simple possession. But it does sound like they will be much more vigorous in their opposition around ensuring that mandatory minimums are still there for firearms offenses, even though many of those have been struck down. And they're also talking about drug trafficking and so on, because they are trying to recast their image from tough on crime to a certain amount of compassion for people with addictions. Now, it's a difficult circle to square, or square to circle, depending on how you look at it, because they are also still opposing things like harm reduction and safe injection sites, because what the evidence is often shown is that people who use these kind of sites do so until they're ready for treatment, and simply offering treatment without having the supports in place until people are ready for treatment seems, in my estimation, to be looking for people to relapse, given that treatment before they're ready doesn't seem to be as effective. We'll see how this goes. It's going to be a very interesting debate, and it is something, though, that the criminal law community is seeing as a positive step and something that is long overdue from this government. For Looney Politics, I'm Dale Smith.